hosted too. And I hosted.
Wonderful, thank you.
Say thanks to all of them.
Yeah, it was
Thank you.
great.
So I'm going to hand Steve the fine basket. Please put $1 in if you plan to vote in the local election. The turnout's usually about 10%. Challenge millions, and put $5 in if you don't, you're not going to vote. I already voted here. So we could. I'd like to get everybody's attention real quick. Just keep going. Speaking of there we go. Let's can we do a moment of silence, please? There was another, as you all know, another senseless shooting last night. I came home from the hockey game. The Kings won in overtime. That was the end of the good news. Came home, turned on the news. 30 people shot at a bowling alley in Maine with a semi-automatic. And the suspect, which is the politically correct word, is in the woods on the run. I don't know if he's been captured this morning. I know who he is. Then the 5 dead in Sampson County, and then 4 inmates, one a murderer, escaped from the prison in Georgia. Thank you, Felix. Let's have a moment of silence, if we could, for the various victims, and particularly those in Maine. Thank you so much. Okay, again, thank you. So, an Amber Alert. All right. So, here we go. We have a new executive secretary of the Rotary District 7710, and the executive secretary has dictated that Sergeant-at-Arms are now to begin with an inspirational story. You may remember Dickie did a great job last week. He gave us the lyrics from It's a Wonderful World for inspiration. So I have one. Fortunately, I found a feel-good story in the news, and maybe some of you saw it as well. And it goes like this. In 2015, Peter Daughtry was on holiday in Kenya. On a hike through the bush, he came across a distressed young bull elephant standing with one leg raised in the air. Peter approached carefully, got down on one knee, and inspected the elephant's foot. He found a large piece of wood deeply embedded in it. As carefully as he could, Peter worked out the wood with his knife, after which the elephant gingerly put its foot down. The elephant stared at him for several tense moments. Peter stood frozen, sure that he was about to be trampled. And then the elephant trumpeted loudly, turned, and walked away. As you can imagine, many of you have been on safari, I suspect, he never forgot the events of that day. Last week, he was walking through the Chicago Zoo with his wife. As they approached the elephant enclosure, a large bull elephant walked over to where Peter and his wife were standing. The elephant stared at Peter, lifted its front foot off the ground, and then put it down. The elephant did this several times, trumpeting loudly, all the while staring at Peter. Remembering the encounter in 2015, Peter couldn't help but wonder if this was the same elephant. Summoning up his courage and doing something he would normally never do, he slipped through the cable wire railing and made his way into the enclosure. He walked slowly up to the elephant. The elephant trumpeted again, gently wrapped its trunk around Peter's legs, then slammed him against the concrete wall, crushing his skull. Peter was killed instantly. Probably not the same elephant. Okay. So that's our inspirational story for today. Now the district executive secretary has also said we need to begin every meeting with the recitation of the 4-way test. So, doing public recitations of pledges is a little tricky, so I want to practice. Those of you who remember the fine film Animal House, there was a fraternity pledge. Let's all stand and do this pledge in the Animal House tradition. So everybody, up, 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 up. Repeat after me. I State your name.
State your name.
Perfect. You got it just right. Do hereby pledge.
Do hereby pledge.
To learn the Rotary four-way test by heart.
To learn the Rotary four-way test by heart.
With liberty and fraternity for all.
With liberty and fraternity for all.
Amen. Thank you. All right. Well done. You did it perfectly. So last week, Dickie shared the history of the four-way test with us. And as he indicated, it was drafted by Herbert Taylor in 1932 in the height of the Great Depression. He was trying to turn around a company, and in fact, as Dickie relates, he did. The four-way test helped him. But I would tell you personally, I have a very hard time remembering it. And I'm always glad I'm not called on, like in law school, to stand up and recite the four-way test. Respectfully submitted, there are three problems with our four-way test. There are too many tests, number one. Number two, one of the tests has two items in it, not one. And lastly, one of the tests is totally redundant. So let's explore it briefly. For those of you who study the ancient philosophers, you know that Aristotle taught us to think in threes. Think in threes, speak in threes, write in threes. And it's brilliant. I've somehow managed to feed my family applying that in business for 25 years. But when you look around you, you'll see that thinking in threes is everywhere. It's in literature, it's in advertising, it's even in government messages. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Government of the people, by the people, for the people. Blood, sweat, and tears. Friends, Romans, countrymen. Vini, vidi, vici. I came, I saw, I conquered. Body, mind, and soul. For those of you who are a little challenged intellectually, lather, rinse, repeat. Good, better, best. Ghosts of Christmas past, present, and future. You get the concept. Even government COVID advertising. Hands, face, space. That was a pretty catchy slogan from the U.S. government. The Brits wasn't as good. Stay home, protect the NHS, save lives. But the bottom line is there's magic in threes. Easy to remember, easy to understand, easy to apply. There's no magic in fours. So let's look at our test. As they say on sports talk radio, let's break it down. So, is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better? Aristotle says, stop, goddammit, stop. You've got a fantastic test. You still have a problem. What's the problem? Number 3 has 2 items in it. You really snuck this as a 5-way test. But is the truth fair to all concerned? If you stop right there, pretty good. Will it be beneficial to all concerned? At the law school, they would say, look, if it's fair to all concerned, it's beneficial to all concerned, right? It's redundant. So, you're probably asking, who at Rotary asked me to edit the 4-way test? Nobody. I'm a recovering attorney on the 12-step program. And I've never seen a document that wouldn't benefit from my editing. And no one has asked me to edit this test, but here's how I would, so it's our test. It's not going to change. It's on the Rotary test. So here's how I suggest you run it. I've got a tip for you. Channel your inner Aristotle. You can remember 3 things. True, fair, it's a little tricky, double one. Build goodwill and friendship. And then instead of a 4th test, put an equal sign. If it does those 3, it's beneficial to all concerned. So for me, that kind of helps. I can remember true, fair, build goodwill and friendship, equals beneficial to everybody. So that's my tip. No charge for that tip for remembering. One quick announcement and then a joke and I'm out of here. So, let me back up. I'm going to open my house up again to the community with my model train set. If those of you haven't seen it, I don't know how many more years this will keep going. So please come. But in honor of this august group right here, I say from the bottom of my heart, I would rather be with you people than with the finest people in the world. So, I have imagined a world in which we have our own building. We don't have to rely on the kindness of strangers. There it is on my train set. modeled in the dubious part of town with some nefarious activity going on. But there it is, a testament to the East Chapel Hill Rotary Club for all visitors to see. All right, that simply leaves a quick joke. This joke needs a little bit of an introduction because I wasn't sure if it passed the Dickie Baddour mom test, and I struggled with that. I lost a lot of sleep over it, as you can imagine. And so I don't know Dickie's mother, but I imagine a kind face and her hair pulled back in a bun and maybe pulling an apple pie out of the oven. And then I saw the video of her on YouTube that went viral. Maybe you saw it, the one where she got kicked out of Keenan Stadium for abusive language and public drunkenness. Here's Dickie's mother here in the cigarette and the hat. This before she blew smoke in the officer's face and told him to go cram it. So now that I know who Dickie's mother is, this joke is great. This won't have any problems. So the pro shop is having a sale on golf balls. So he buys as many as he can and stuffs all the golf balls in the front pockets of his pants. He then boards the number 24 bus headed for home. As luck would have it, a woman sits down next to him. The woman keeps looking quizzically at him and at his bulging pockets, back at him and at his bulging pockets. Finally, after many such glances from her, and to break the awkwardness, he says, "It's golf balls." Nevertheless, the woman continued to look at him in his bulging pockets. Finally, not being able to contain her curiosity any longer, she asked, "Does it hurt as much as tennis elbow?"
So as if I'm not in enough trouble already for people that have gotten to volunteer for Sergeant at Arms. Now, today, Bob talks about threesomes. Great. Way to go, So I am serving as your president today. I'll be real quick. I wanted to mention last week, Dickie, when he was Sergeant at Arms, used military jargon referring to himself as Sergeant. He assigned me the position of captain, and he said President Mike was a colonel. Looking around the room, just about all of you are old enough to remember the program The Jeffersons with the theme song Moving On Up. I have moved on up. I am the colonel this week. But I don't know. So Mike Clayton, AWOL, President-elect Tim Smith, AWOL, Program Chair Nick Vaughn, AWOL, Grand Poobah Jim Havner, AWOL. I don't know if I've been promoted or if maybe it was a couldn't, folks. Maybe I'm here for good. Anyway, there are a few announcements to make. Tom Shea has one.
Yeah, just real quick. In the scuttlebutt last week and this week, you saw there's some announcements from the environmental program group. A couple of talks that are going to be given by Zoom. One is going to be November 1st by the woman who is the community relations person for recycling in Chapel Hill and Orange County. So if you want to figure out why can't we do what we did 2 years ago, or why are we going to do something different next year, and where does the stuff we put on the curb go, she'll be able to answer your questions. There's also another talk on November 28th by Aaron Saltzman, who is the director of the Water Institute at UNC, and I think Dave Moreau helped us set this up. He's going to talk by Zoom again about what they do in that initiative there on campus and how that pertains to the water initiative that Mike Clayton and Peggy have been working on here in town. And then there's also going to be another event, just sort of a get-together at Liz Hankey's on the 15th, and so if you want to come and just sort of get involved or find out what some of the future things might be for the environmental group, and also Liz is a great cook, so everybody will be well taken care of. You can put that on your calendar as well. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Tom. Why do you have an announcement?
Very, very quick, I'm making an announcement on behalf of Ed Milk. You may know that Christmas House is December 2nd, and I think we're going to have about 20 bikes and helmets to give away. we're getting 40 bikes and helmets. Half of them, I think, go to the children of the New Hope School area. Those are going to be delivered somewhere else. But on December 2nd, we have to staff a little room where we have the bikes, and certain families qualify to get a bike, and then they come in and look at the bikes and so forth and try to find one that's the right size and everything. So we'll be sending out some sign-up sheets on November 3rd, 10th, and 17th. We'd like some ideas on how to get a little publicity about this for Rotary. We're in last year we had a little tiny room right at the front. I don't think anybody knew who the group was. So if anybody had a sign, or if somebody wants to dress up as Santa Claus and stand outside the bike room all day, they can do that. But just think about it. We'll be sending a sign-up sheet, and it's nice to see the families and the kids that qualify for the bikes, and they come in and sit on them, and the little helmets are real cute with them.
Thank you, Lila. Are there any other announcements? If not, I'd like to call on Becky Woodruff's husband to come on up and do an induction.
As I say, I'm Mr. Becky Woodruff. I'd like to ask Lorenzo and Greg to come up. We're fortunate to be inducting a new member to Rotary today. Greg, you're becoming a part of a worldwide organization that you'll find real benefits in. If you ever have a question or a problem or an issue, whether you're here in Chapel Hill or elsewhere, find a Rotarian and they'll be glad to help you with it. A story comes to mind. Most of our older members remember Jesse last night and his going to Seattle for a bone marrow transplant for his son. He was out there several months, and the Rotary Club out there basically adopted Jesse, and it made him feel at home out there in Seattle. When you travel to other areas, find a Rotary Club, go to lunch. You'll find interesting food, interesting conversations, some of which you may not understand, but there's usually somebody who can translate it for you. And take a flag with you. You see our flags that we have over here from Rotary Clubs all around the world. Take a flag, give it to the people there, and get one of their flags and bring it back to our club. Rotary is a fellowship club, and that's what I enjoy most about our Rotary Club is getting to know our fellow members, and most of my good friends now have been generated through the Rotary Club. So it's really a great organization. We're a special club. You'll get more out of it the more you put into it. So get involved, go to join various committees, help with the bike situation, bike giveaway, other things that we do, teacher supply store, etc. Our motto is service above self, and so that's really what we try to do as Rotarians. Sort of in response to Bob, I have sort of a little different take on the 4-way test. First one to me deals with integrity. Always have integrity in everything you say and do. Fairness, always be fair to everyone. And then the third one to me is more about fellowship. And that's what our club is. It's a fellowship club. And the last one is interactions. How do we interact with people? And it should always be of mutual benefit. Create win-win situations in every situation that you deal in, so that you do follow the 4-way test and all that you say and do. What we'd like to do now is have you give us 60 seconds or 90 seconds on yourself and kind of how you learned about Rotary Club and what you do.
Hey everyone, 60 seconds. So is it this speed dating approaches? So my name is Greg Kane. I'm a high school teacher over at East Chapel Hill High School. I'm in my 29th year of teaching. I teach English as a second language and math and also social studies. I'm originally from Montreal, Canada. Yes, I do speak French. My two eldest sons went through the Chapel Hill school systems. Oldest one graduated 2 years ago in business school. The other one is a senior in mechanical engineering. I also, outside of teaching, I also coach. I coach high school swimming at East Chapel Hill High School. I used to coach swimming over at Chapel Hill High School. It's kind of switched over. I've coached baseball, and softball, and a bunch of other things like that, and triathlons as well. Is that 60 seconds? Anything else you guys want to know? I'm a teacher, and you give me one of these, I'll go on forever. So I want to respect your time.
And if I may, I'm Greg's sponsor. All members are great for our club. This new member is maybe unique. Greg is already involved supporting the efforts and services of our club before he became a member. He is the teacher leader of our Interact Club. So what do we have, 60 kids now?
Yeah.
We have 60 kids at East Chapel Hill High. They are very excited. They need someone to give them guidance and someone who's on the ground in the school. There's nothing better than that for us to build this club and have an impact in the community with kids. And certainly, you know, the single biggest desire I have is that young kids get involved so that we have a tradition and the thing grows. And Greg is our man on the ground to help support that. That's awesome.
Bike night. Bring those kids to bike night.
Yeah.
Sure. And
Thank you. Well,
Thank you.
welcome, Greg. Kelly, would you please come up? We have a transfer from the Durham Club, Kelly Thompson, who is the new executive director of CQ Family House, and so I'd like to have her introduce herself to the club.
Thanks, Bob, and thanks for greeting me outside the door today and just being so hospitable. So I appreciate being able to transfer and join the club here. I know so many of you, just starting last month as the executive director of the Family House just down the road, are integrally involved with the house and have done so much for our charity. And so I look forward to learning more about your history and how you've been involved, and just want to, I'd be remiss if I didn't say that in my minute welcome to say thank you to everyone here for everything you've done for the organization I now have the honor of working for. Real briefly about me, before I moved to North Carolina 3 years ago, I moved here to be closer to family. My son's at UNC, my daughter's at NC State, so that's great as well. But before that, I ran a Ronald McDonald House program for 10 years as the CEO in Illinois, and so I have a strong foundation in that hospitality world, and I look forward to bringing that to the Family House here. And I mentioned personally that I'm somewhat new still to North Carolina, having moved here 3 years ago, so I love it, and I give thanks every day on the first day of winter that I'm not in Illinois anymore, and that I'm in North Carolina and having a warmer winter. So thank you, and I look forward to getting to know everybody.
JP.
Thank you, Steve. I didn't know Dickie's mom was a smoker.
He'll get his turn.
Slater, I've been plagued with golf balls my whole life. So, with us today, we've got, thankfully, Dr. Nico Haggard. Is that correct? Who is filling in for our House of Representatives, Valerie Fouchy, who cannot be with us today, so he kindly stepped in. Nico is a neighbor of Nick Vaughn. His biography you can all read. I read it. I still don't know what he does, but he's a French-American optical engineer and assistant professor in the Department of Applied Physical Sciences at UNC and co-founder of Carolina Instruments. Nico is a widely honored researcher for many groundbreaking advances in a multitude of biomedical engineering technologies that are primarily centered around optical devices developed to detect dysfunctions of the arousal response that occur in a variety of neuropsychiatric disorders.
Hey, John.
Deep breath. All right. Anyway,
give us get a round of applause for Dr. Reniko Hagar.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ron. Thanks for this lovely introduction. It's hard to follow after that. So let's take one second. All right. So, well, yeah. Thanks for welcoming me here. When my neighbor Nick was saying, they were like, "Why don't you come give us a talk?" I was like, "Great! It's a new audience, and it's mostly an audience that is not neuroscientists. They're going to bombard me with questions. So I'm really hopeful today that the questions are going to be really nice and not very difficult to answer. Let's cross fingers. We'll see." So I'm a junior faculty at UC Chapel Hill. I was trained as an engineer in France. And when I started at Chapel Hill, I interacted with neuroscientists and I say, your problems is how I get my funding. So in those discussions, I told them, I would like to build technology that make your research easier. And this is an interaction between engineering and science that can work together to solve problems. Today I want to give you one example of one of the technologies that we developed. And I had to work late last night to turn it into a talk that, like, I think is targeting to a broad audience. So I want to get started with a very simple example of the type of problems that we're trying to deal with. So let's imagine we'll go to the movie together. What does it mean to go to the movie from a scientific perspective is we're going to be exposed to a continuous series of frames and storylines. And there is in this storyline some events, like there's the introduction, something scary, calm scenes, there's the violence, something surprising, calm scenes, a car chase, suspense, conclusions, all of that. And this is going to be the same image that everybody here in the audience will be seeing. And at the same time, let's imagine that we're going to keep an eye on your level of attention or arousal in the clinical sense, how much you are responding to this movie. And so if we try to encode this arousal or attention level, and we look at it over time, it may look something like this. We can see that when there's something scary, all of a sudden you're paying attention, you're responding to this movie. And when it's more calm or, let's say, boring, depending on the quality of the movie, you may not be as excited about it. Or if something else happened, briefly a surprise that will catch your attention. And if we do that with multiple people, what we'll typically observe is that we all have the same kind of reaction with small differences. Sometimes you may be on your phone and you won't have a reaction at the right moment, but overall, we'll get the same type of reactions. And what psychiatrists that I work with have observed is that if you happen to be affected by a neuropsychiatric disorder of pretty much any kind, you will see dysfunctions of the arousal response. That is that whatever you're experiencing will not be aligned with the expected level of response based on the environment and the stimulus you're facing. And so this would look something like this, and what they have characterized is what they call hypo and hyperarousal, and let me define. Hypoarousal would be something like this, where your level of attention is low even though we expect it to be high, like you're basically not having emotion around something that is very eventful. Or you will have hyperarousal, which is a very high level of attention and awareness at a moment where we expect this level of awareness to be low. And what they found in their research is that hyperarousal and hyperarousal, dysfunctions of the arousal response, are characteristic of many neuropsychiatric disorders. In anxiety, for instance, you're sitting on a couch, nothing happens, and all of a sudden you would be like looking around and being very aware of like things that like are affecting you, but not because of external stimulus. Or in depression, you would be, for instance, not reacting to your environment as much as you'd be expecting to, and not, for instance, following a conversation. These would be symptoms. And in autism, it manifests itself in both ways, and it's something that you can detect early on in infants before even the parents, for instance, sometimes report that they may be signs and symptoms of autism spectrum disorder. And so, at this point, I hope that I've convinced. Yes, please.
One question. How are you measuring the levels of arousal?
That is the purpose of my next couple of slides. I'm just getting there. Thank you so much. This is a perfect question. I love it. Thank you so much. So, at this point, and we're not there yet, I just hope that I've convinced you, and this is the rule of three, actually, I did my homework, that measuring arousal, whatever that is important. because it could be used for diagnosis. If you can detect those events, you can confirm whether or not someone is affected by a disease. It can be used for treatment, because if I can detect those specific events when your arousal response is off, we can decide that it's time to call a friend, time to call a provider, time to take a medication that can be acting fast. And it's also valuable for research, because if we understand those phenomena, if we have a lot of data about those phenomena across a large population, we can try to see if there's a neural basis for those disorders and try to come up with better drugs. And now to answer your question, the problem, and this is why I'm still having a job, is that it's measured indirectly. There is no sensor for arousal. It's not like a thermometer you put in the mouth to get a number. And that data that I'm showing you doesn't exist yet. Arousal is measured as a superposition of multiple phenomena. What we know is that arousal correlates with pupil size. And commonly in the cartoon, paying attention to something, your pupil will dilate. For no other reason than you're paying attention to something. Eye motion is an indicator of arousal as well. If you're moving your eyes towards a scene, away from a scene, or even just moving them, that's an indicator of arousal. Heart rate. When you're scared, your heart rate drops for a second. If you also like breathing rates, is going to be changing during those events. So there is no sensor for arousal, but we know how to characterize arousal from not one, but multiple, and there's others in this list, from multiple types of biometric indicators that contain a lot of noise. Sometimes these things vary not because of arousal, but because of other factors. So it's data that is contained in a broad distribution of information that is difficult to acquire. And the reason why it's difficult to acquire is that currently, if you want to do a study of the arousal response, you have to fit the patient. So this is not a patient. I could not show you patient data. This is my colleague Rebecca and her lovely daughter, just posing for the picture so that we can show people what's going on. But this is what it would look like to do an arousal response test. You would fit the patient with heart rate monitors, respiration monitors, and you would use a machine that is right under the TV here that tracks their eye motion and their pupil size. It's extremely expensive. If it's an infant, the parent has to wear goggles that hide the eyes so that the machine tracks the eyes of the kid and not the eyes of the parent. And overall, what we get with that is maybe an hour tops, because it's not, you have to go to the lab to do it. So we get low amounts of data, and we get unreliable data, because you're studying arousal in an environment that is not familiar. Kids might be scared for all I know, and the data is just not very much usable. That's the problem that we're facing. And so that's where we were when we started being interested in that problem. So my colleague Jose Rodriguez Omeguera and I, we decided to talk about those problems, but we don't talk about it in humans first, we talk about it in mice. And say, how hard would it be to measure arousal responses in mice? And we decided that it would be interesting to answer the solution if it could be ported later on to humans. So we found two clinicians, Antoni Zanas and Rebecca Gradinsky, and we gathered our team and we started discussing those problems as a comprehensive approach. So this is basically all ends, from an engineer all the way to a doctor who sees patients, something that I really don't want to do. So we have a broad set of expertise, but we work together to come up with a solution. And the solution we came up with, actually it's inspired by a meme you can find online, so let me just show you this. This is a video where you take a flashlight and you put it in the back of the head of the cat. And if you look at it, what happens is that the body is transparent to infrared light to red light. I can demonstrate that right here. I brought my flashlight. So very briefly, this flashlight emits light in all colors, red, green, blue. If I put my hand right there, you can see that the red light will go through, all right? So red light goes through tissue. Infrared light goes through tissue even better. You can actually go through an entire cat head very easily and capture that. So since we saw that video, it was like, well, very easily what we can do is build a little device that will inject some light, very little amounts of light, like very, very small amounts, like a small LED, that will inject some light in the back of the head of the mouse and collect the amount of light that comes out of the eye, primarily of the eye, and measure that amount of information. So this is a very simple sensor. I actually have one right here. I don't know if you can see it. It's at the end of my hand. It weighs about 1 gram. It costs about $5 to make. It takes an hour to assemble, 3 hours if you're my grad students.
It's very comfortable too. I'm wearing mine now.
But it is a device that we tested, that we demonstrated in mice. And the reason it works is because the pupil is actually more permeable to infrared light than the rest of the eye. So when we put it on mice, what we find is that the amount of light that comes out of the eye, the amount of infrared light that comes out of the eye, is proportional to the size of the pupil. But because there is tissue in between, it also changes because of heartbeats, just like a pulse oximeter, by the way. It's the exact same technology. When you clip that around your finger, it measures the transmission of light through your finger, and the pulse of blood creates little waves that you can very easily detect. And when you're breathing, your body moves, tissue gets squished, and squishing tissue changes transmission, so we can also detect breathing. So the data that we get looks a little bit like that. So we call our colleagues in computer science and say, fix that, and do a frequency filter or something like that. And we can extract basically, some of that. We can extract 3 biometric indicators: heart rate, breathing rate, and pupil size. So the 3 together, they're actually really good indicators of arousal responses. And because it's super lightweight, we can have it mounted on an animal that is free to roam around the cage and experience the natural interactions that animals are experiencing. We don't have to fix them under a microscope or to block them from being able to roam freely. That ability to be free makes the science possible because they can now interact with other mice, things like that, and we can study their natural behavior. So that's why it works for mice. We're very happy about that. Started giving some good data. So we actually turned it into a device that's more, practical. We put magnets on it so it holds pretty well. We actually designed an entire circuit board. It took us 3 months to get that done. That basically takes as little amount of light as possible and captures the most noise-free data. And the first result that we found, this is kind of like the first way we're going to get a paper out of this. This is not published, so don't take pictures. But the first thing we realized is something that is an interesting finding is that in an arousal response, these biometric responses don't happen at the same time. So the experiment that we've done here is very simple. We take a mouse, we give them the device, put them on their head, we start recording, and we expose the mouse to an odor. It's called TMT, I forgot the name. But it's basically something that is extracted from fox urine, and it scares the mouse because it's a predator. And it's extremely potent, so they really react strongly to it. And when the mice smell this odor and are absolutely afraid for their life at the moment, they get a very strong and very predictable arousal response. And what we saw is the moment you start exposing them to TMT, the first thing that happens is the respiration rate increases, then the heart rate drops, and then the pupil size increases. And so the fact that those phenomena don't happen synchronously means that it's important to acquire them all together. And in fact, it's important to have them all together because individually those curves might be meaningless. The heart rate may drop, the breathing rate may go up, but if they happen in that particular sequence, then we can identify more clearly that there is a strong arousal response. So we made a device to acquire that. And then our next step was to say, well, can we translate this to human research? So for human research, we envisioned a product that is very, very similar. We started like that. We basically said we're gonna expose the subject with some infrared light on the side of the eye, and we're gonna measure with a photodetector in front of their eye very closely and see if we can pick up that signal. So this is the very first experiment we've done. I like to joke about it. Sometimes I say it works in grad students, but we haven't tested it in humans yet, but it's not nice. So anyway, so this is the data. So this is our one of my grad students who volunteered for that. And put no pressure. I actually volunteered it myself, but they did it before. And you can see basically a camera picture showing you the infrared light. You can see that it actually glows across the eye, but also through the pupil. So that variability exists, we can pick up the signal. And we use the camera to track the pupil size as ground truth. And we're able to verify that our device actually picks up the pupil size accurately. And so the advantage, of course, is that this is a sensor that is extremely small. So instead of having a camera that is looking at your eye or very difficult to integrate, I mean, you've seen the Google cameras that can be pretty bulky. We can come up with a solution that will integrate those chips that are low power into a rather good-looking pair of goggles. So I'm not a graphic designer, so my goggles don't look very nice yet, but we can probably fix that. But the idea is that we want to come up with, we're building actually a device that has an array of detectors And the reason why we put an array of detectors is that more data, more information, but we can pick up pupil size, heart rate, breathing rate. We can also track the eye, because as the eye moves left and right, the distribution of light changes between sensors, and we can also measure basically another phenomenon, which is the motions of the eye that are also a very good indicator of the arousal response. So what we have at this point is a device that we hope to bring to commercialization, because there's a big need for that kind of technology. The scientists we work with are pretty excited about that. So we know nothing about business because we're scientists. And we started simply building a device that works in mice, and we said we're going to put it on the website, list it for sale, and see if anybody buys it. That's pretty much what we're doing out of my garage right now. We created an LLC, and that was just about as much paperwork as I wanted to do. And but what we have is a vision for what we want to do go from there. So once we have a working prototype that works well in humans, we want to build a device that is going to be first used by scientists to measure arousal responses in a setting that is better than the lab. We want to send people home and say, go about your own life, come back in a week, and we're going to look at the data and see what your arousal response was in an environment that is familiar to you. So this is something we want to do first for diagnosis, for research purposes, to try to understand basically what are dysfunctions of the arousal response, what do they do, how can we help that inform us on how to better diagnose neuropsychiatric diseases. And then we imagined that it could be turned into a wearable device that could be prescribed by a doctor. For instance, if you are suffering from anxiety or from depression, and the device will be able to tell right at the precise moment if we observe that you're in a situation that is not normal or not sustainable or not safe for you. We could basically pair that goggle with your cell phone, and if an arousal response dysfunction is detected, we could simply send a message that say, hey, we noticed something is off. Right now would be a great time to step aside from what you're doing, change situation, or call a friend, or call your provider, or in the future, take some fast-acting medication. The type of medication we cannot prescribe yet now, because unless they're taken exactly at the right time, they may not have the effect that we're hoping for. And so that's basically like where we're going. And in longer term, just like a Fitbit for mental health, we imagine that people would just want to wear that for fun, just get to know more about their own mental health and see how they're doing overall. Even if you're not diagnosed with a particular condition, it's always good to be able to monitor what it does for you. And then looking back at your four-way test, this is where things become a little bit controversial because it has to be beneficial. And so information is not always valuable. So we're also talking to people who study like research ethics and trying to see if there is ways we can make sure this thing doesn't get misused by people who want to track people's attention for, let's say, non-constructive purposes. It has to be beneficial. I would agree with that. And so that's basically where we are now. We're building prototypes and trying to hopefully make it work for patients. We're going to start. We're writing a research protocol for the study of autism disorders in infants. The idea is that when a sibling has autism disorder, the infant is more at risk of having autism disorder as well. And so those infants are good candidates for a study where if we're able to observe how they behave, how they respond to stimulus at an early age, we're hoping to see if by detecting those dysfunctions early on, we can make accurate predictions about conditions. And if we can make accurate predictions earlier, we can start treatment strategies early and perhaps mitigate the effects of autism in kids. A disease that we don't really know how to cure. Actually, not a disease, it's a disorder spectrum. That is, it's considered to be it can affect you to a level that is clinical, but there are small variations that are perfectly variations on normal. So it's not even well characterized, and I'm not an expert, so I don't want to speak too much about that. But if you're curious and interested, what I hope to convey here is that we have been able to get where we are because we decided to tackle a problem from an interdisciplinary perspective. We took engineers, scientists, and clinicians, we had them work together. I think it's a very, very fruitful strategy. And basically, the thing, what are the things that we're not doing well in this thing? The thing that's giving us the most struggle is commercialization. We're not trained business people. And so a lot of you here have business experience, sometimes many years of business experience. So we're always welcoming any kind of advice you have on how to go from there. Because we have very good funding sources. We know how to get research all the way to a paper. but going the extra mile and turning the duct tape device into something that can actually be used by others, it's something that requires a level of energy and resources that we don't know where to look for. And so that's the kind of thing that we're always interested in doing. And so like I did that slide, it's like, if you're interested in helping us, and we want your advice, basically. So again, right, rule of threes, I did my homework. Advice, we're looking for business advice in general. We don't know exactly what we're doing and how we're gonna get this into a commercial device. And then advocacy. This is something I'd like to share here, is that UNC and NC State have historically been the liberal arts college and the engineering school. And I think this vision is not really compatible anymore with how we do research nowadays. UNC and NC State would really both benefit from having engineering at UNC and having more liberal arts training at NC State, because it's this kind of interdisciplinary approaches that make basically better scientists overall. And so I hope to convince that with our experience here, one of our projects we've been working on, and how successful we've been in coming up with solutions that work in mice, hopefully in humans, it's something that needs to be done, and that's something I'm really passionate about at UNC. I really want to bring more engineering and engineering disciplines represented at UNC, because that's the one area where like I wish I could recruit more students. And then community, we have lots of graduating students who are looking for jobs. We don't know where to send them. So we send them to LinkedIn, but this is not necessarily the best thing. We have tons of activities in the research triangle. And so if you have particular needs for skills, I would love to hear about those myself, because in how we design courses and the classes that we teach, there is a lot of things we can do to really give the students the best way to be prepared for their future careers. And so in your experience, for instance, maybe there was something you're thinking today and say, I wish I had been taught that in college. Well, if you wish that, you need to tell me, because I wish I could tell that to the students as well. So this is the kind of interesting thoughts I would like to share. I'm happy to continue this discussion with you. This is our lab, two pictures from our lab. So this is our team. The close team was Jose Rodriguez-Magura and I, and our grad students and postdocs and trainees. We've been very generously funded by a lot of institutions. So our lab really works efficiently, and we're on track to really publish a couple papers over the next year that I hope to be impactful, hopefully, because I'm up for tenure. And then I really want to point out, really in the scope of discussing local involvement, there are two foundations that have been very generous to us. The Burroughs Welcome Fund, they gave me an award when I started UNC that really helped me really accelerate my career. And the Foundation of Hope, I think they're owners of Angus Bar, a very tasty restaurant that my wife says I should not go too much, because it's very good portions. And they have a foundation that basically raises money for research in mental health, and they've been extremely generous to UNC overall. So a lot of those local advocacy groups and funding agencies have been really helping us just accelerate how we do research and actually put us on track to get we just got an R1 grant from the NIH, so that's going to be bringing a couple $1 million to the lab to continue research over the next 5 years. Now with that, thank you very much, and I'll take any questions. My host is in charge of telling me when I should stop talking, so I'll take questions up until then, by all means.
Yeah, are there any applications you envision for people that have dementia or Alzheimer's, things like that?
I'm not the expert to ask that question. And someone asked me that about Parkinson's. There might be correlations between those neurodegenerative diseases and arousal responses. I'm not aware of that. I expect they're there, but it's probable that there are better ways to diagnose phenomena and to observe phenomena with other technology. So I'm not sure this is actually compatible, but it would be worth looking into. Yes, please.
How do you determine the situation the person is in when they have those responses? Is there a camera that shows what's going on around them at that point in time? How do you connect the data to what's happening?
We would be looking into habits and capturing environmental data. So if you connect it to your phone, for instance, your phone has an accelerometer, it's got a GPS, it's got a microphone, and all these things can provide cues about what you're doing. So the idea is that it would be a rather invasive, privacy invasive approach where you would have to gather a lot of data, but from your phone only, we can get really, if I say, hey Google, everybody is going to have their phone, react to it. And there's a lot of information we can get simply from your phone. We could imagine that like it would involve additional monitors about your environment. For instance, your workplace. We could imagine that your webcam would be streaming some information and helping in this condition. This is not being ironed out yet. Yes, please.
So I'm sure you've thought of this already, but there are plenty of commercialization paths that I can imagine just off the top of my head. Any stressful situation where an individual needs to have their stress response very much under control. No, hypo or hyper, law enforcement, air traffic control, air pilots, anyone involved in transportation, the military. I mean, there were maybe not graduate students. They have very low stress responses, or they wouldn't take call years.
So there are pathways for that, and this is where like my specialty is like the device we're developing is for arousal response more than it is for attention. For attention, there are very simple sensors. You can imagine like an accelerometer on glasses that detects when your head tilts is enough, for instance, if you want to track the awareness of someone who's operating machinery. And so there are already commercial devices that are out there. The ones that we're looking at really, so we were talking at some point to the DoD about tracking like the level of stress in combat. For instance, combat units. This would be an application where like this would be an information that is relevant because it's not so much about attention, it's about the perception of the environment. And so that's where we specialize, I would say. There are devices that do attention tracking and they're pretty good at it so far. So we need to be dissociated from that. Yes, please?
Yes. Now, I'm speaking of not the glasses, but the actual technology behind it. Have you applied for a patent for that?
Yeah, we're licensing the patent right now.
Good. Okay, excellent.
Yes?
Okay, can you, you could put some prescriptions in the glasses and make them, that people would, be willing to wear and wear around, but would that skew the data if there were different prescriptions in the glass?
You talking about like eyewear prescription?
Yeah.
Like the glass? No, this would be independent. So the glasses that you're seeing, everything that is measured happens behind the glass. In fact, we would actually put an infrared blocker on the glass to make sure that we record infrared from the eye and not from the sunlight.
Okay.
And it would not interfere. Yes, please.
Just a side note, your comment about blending NC State and UNC, I think we can all agree anything you can do to help make NC State more like UNC, we'll all agree is an improvement. But in a big picture standpoint, autism, the spectrum, these type of things, it seems to me that that's really been something that's kind of entered conversation and awareness in the last, say, 10 or 20. I don't remember that being such a topic, say, back in the 60s and 70s, or back like when Steve Bromley was young in the 1800s. And I'm wondering, is that because that phenomena has increased in our society, or has it always been the same? Like, is it the same baseline and we're just now able to recognize it more, or is there a correlation between our current society and all the data and is the way we're living today versus say 100 years ago increasing this phenomenon?
There's a little bit of all of that. I think the first thing that we're doing is we're diagnosing more and we're setting up thresholds lower at what characterizes, for instance, autism spectrum disorder. 100 years ago, you would be born in a remote area away from doctors. You would be called like the village idiot, and in fact, you would be someone who is affected by a type of neuropsychiatric disorder, probably treatable in many cases, and not receiving any care. And so there's been increasing, would it be access to mental health diagnosis? So diagnosis has improved as a result. A lot of people got diagnosed with something and got a label put on a condition that sometimes they didn't know they had. For instance, I bite my fingernail. I have anxiety. I never heard about the word anxiety until I was, 12. It could have been diagnosed if I was born in a different place, like in the US, where anxiety is more of a formally diagnosed phenomenon. And then there is a stigma of mental health. I mean, I grew up, for instance, in rural France, where you never say that you go see a shrink. like when my colleague was murdered, that first thing that I did was to go see a therapist, and I'm still going every week, and I'm very open about it because it's one of the things that the taboo actually is what drives people to make wrong decisions and not seek care when they need it, for instance. So that's one of the things. So diagnosis has improved. Yeah. I don't think there's anything specific we do in our society that is different than years ago. Like we learn to cope with things differently. A century ago, you would have 9 siblings, and 2 of them would make it to adulthood, and we learned to live with that. So trauma was part of normal life. Nowadays, having a death as a child is a trauma event that nobody expects to do, and that's different. Our perspective has changed, the diagnosis has changed, society has changed too. But I think it's different. It's not more or less. But that's my own perspective. It's not. We're not talking science. It's my perception. Yes, please.
Is the technology sophisticated enough that, for instance, 2 people could be watching the same event, like the shooting last night that we heard about? One person could be angry, the person next to them could be sad. They both might have an arousal response, or how can you differentiate that sort of reaction?
They both would have an arousal response. They both would have a different time arousal response based on how they react to it, but we're not at a level where we'll be characterizing emotions directly. We'll be picking up data in the lines of like, oh, you've had, for instance, an episode of anxiety after seeing that newscast event that lasted 10 minutes. And for the case of the person next to you, they were not paying attention to TV, they only had something react to it 20 minutes down the line and the next day. And it also compounds with all the things that you live through because we're constantly being stimulated. So like the moment you and I leave the couch to go do our own business, unless we're doing exactly the same thing, our experience differs. And so it's hard, which is why we're not talking about tracking individual events all the time, that's for diagnosis. We're also talking about capturing longitudinal data across many weeks to try to get a picture of like what is affecting you, how does one react to a broad spectrum of stimulus. Yes, please.
Just to help out, I am a 1-year retired orthopedic surgeon from UNC. And I can tell you that for orthopedics, we have been able to get PhDs that used to be at NC State on campus. So Jason Francis and Mary Alice Jones is doing fall research right now.
Oh, I work with him, yeah.
Right, so he's a good guy. But I can tell you that if you got all that funding and you're not going to cost them anything, there's a way to do this because all they care about is you're costing them. But exercise and sports science is another one that's on campus at UNC. So I think there is a way to do it, and maybe somebody like Jason or somebody can help you out, or
but I don't have particular trouble recruiting students. I think it's more of a philosophical question. Is like I think we would benefit as a university.
No, I agree with you. I think that it's been for us that if we want to do biomechanical research, it's got to be done at NC State. So we have to drive all the way to Raleigh to do it. We don't have a way of doing it. We do have vivariums on campus at UNC, but we don't have the people to do the testing on. So I think there has to be, but I think there should be a way through the neurosurgery department for you to get, the neurology department for you to get people at UNC. That would be the idea.
Oh, absolutely. I agree. Thank you. All right, one last question. I don't want to take you pick, please.
UNC had a school of engineering up until the 30s, when during the Depression, they created the Women's College that created the engineering program at NC State. So maybe you can resurrect that.
That wasn't a question.
Well, I mean, mine isn't a question either, goes along with what Tom was saying. Have you ever thought about doing twin studies to maybe standardize some of responses, since identical twins kind of...
There are more proximity with that. I don't think we can justify it at this point because even though there are a lot of twin studies are typically for biological and biophysical studies, even though they're twins, their experience in life actually slightly differ from what they want. And I think it's not clinically relevant at this point to do twin studies. Also, twins are very, very often solicited for studies. So if we don't have a very definite reason to do that, there's plenty of things we can do before we think about that. But I'm not sure it's relevant. Again, that would be my colleagues to answer. I'm not an expert in this area. Thank you very much.
Hey, if everybody could throw their plates in the trash, that would be appreciated.
I mean, it's more thoughtful. Just liar. Yeah, I like it. Just one more.
So I am